So when we look at this work, you're trying to come listen to it from a space, trying to listen to it from the part of you that is seeking, the part of you that's trying to reconcile what doesn't feel right yet, what doesn't feel perfect yet, what doesn't feel at peace yet. You're trying to look at it, trying to listen to it, trying to hear it from that place where you're an earnest seeker. And it's not about swallowing it wholeheartedly. It's about letting it press up against you and you pressing up against it until you can have a reconciliation inside yourself. And so that whatever you choose, whether you keep your own beliefs, you take on some new meaning behind the phrases tonight, or it's some synthesis of both, that it's something that you can walk away with and you can let it settle inside of you. A sense of ease, a sense of the beginning of, or the middle of, or the end of a transformation, a way of becoming. Non-dual awakening says that it's already perfect. It's just about correcting the mistake that is not perfect yet. And with time, you can say a statement like, I'm transforming and I'm already perfect. And they make complete sense. They're not a contradiction. This is verse 32 of chapter 13 of the Gita. Just as the all-pervading space, being subtle, is not contaminated, so too the self, present everywhere in the body, is not contaminated. Just as the all-pervading space, being subtle, is not contaminated, so too the self, present everywhere in the body, is not contaminated. All-pervading space in this verse is referring to the idea of ether, the idea of, in yoga, the Sanskrit is akasha, and it represents this thing that's sort of beyond our normal sense of matter. So the air, the objects around you, your body, the outer space, like out beyond the atmosphere, the earth itself, all exist in this field of what is called ether theory. So that's what they're referencing when they talk about this all-pervading space, that there's this fundamental substratum of the space that we all fit inside, and it's not a vacuum. If you took away these physical objects, there would still be the space. If you took away the air, it's what is left. It's the substratum that all these sense objects are dwelling in and are changing within. So the all-pervading space being subtle, by subtle they mean it's so delicate, it's so impervious to our attempts to manipulate it, that it cannot be contaminated. Concrete objects, we can chop down the trees, we can make pollution, we can make our body toxic, we can contaminate things that are inside the ether, inside the space. But the field, the space itself, cannot be. It can't be touched. And so the word subtle does not mean weak. It means soft, but it doesn't mean weak. It actually means incredibly powerful, because we can't harm it. No harm can be done to this all-pervading space. It's sort of like the nest or the womb of all material objects. This is what I mean by all-pervading space. Being subtle, it cannot be harmed, it can't be contaminated, it can't be tainted. And so you just want to hold that idea of an ether. Maybe you have a personal philosophy, or you have a way of relating to it in a scientific way, physics way. Just some sort of way to grasp that concept and tether it into your mind, because what they're saying is they're making a metaphor, a comparison to the next piece of the verse, which is, so too the self, and by self it's Atma. Atma is your sense of self. Your sense of self. Present everywhere in the body. So what they're saying is that no part of you is not the self. Just like no part of this universe, this phenomenological world, is not within and a part of this ether. Your self is all within you and without you, present everywhere in the body. And no matter what happens to your body, no matter what happens to your body, you get sick, you get very healthy, you fill yourself with anger, you fill yourself with happiness. The self is not contaminated. Now, people think happiness is a good thing. Well, I'll be happy to contaminate myself with happiness. But they're saying that's like wishful thinking. That's not reality. That's not the truth, according to this verse. That the sense of self is beyond your ability to be happiness, or be anger, or be sadness, or be the upset stomach because you ate bad food. The self is something actually beyond it. It's everywhere. So it can't be contaminated in the same way that the ether, being everywhere, can't be contaminated by the good things or the bad things that happen in this world, in this space. The self witnesses, maybe you could say experiences, happiness, sadness, anger, but the self as an entity, as a thing, is not affected. They're using contaminated, polluted, harmed by. It can't be touched by it. So we should reflect on this. Maybe you can just, your own awareness to hear my words. Maybe it's a little bit of a psychological challenge. So the belief of the meaning behind these phrases, they're actually, what are they assaulting? Are they assaulting you? Are they assaulting yourself? Or are they assaulting the parts of you that disagree? Meaning the beliefs or the values or your history or experience that is not in alignment with that statement. And so that part of you, that belief structure, whatever it is, says, oh, wait a minute, what about this? And I think that this only affirms the verse, because you can still, even though you're feeling an affront maybe, or an agreement, if it's an agreement, you're feeling this phrase, the meanings behind the words I'm saying, come into your field and have an impact in some way. Contamination is kind of a negative bias, but it could be a positive bias too. It's affecting you. So as you feel your response to the meaning behind this phrase, it's a query right for right now. Can you feel a sense of self that is different from that value, from that response you're having to the phrase? They're saying that the self is actually beyond it or behind it. And there's an awareness there that no matter what you try to make or pretend that you are, you will always be able to recognize this self. Why? Because it's present everywhere. It's not going anywhere. For a little while, we may make a mistake, and we may confuse and think so fully. This is the contamination that they're talking about. We may think so fully that we are this body, or we are this belief, we are this value, we are this memory. And in that period, in that moment, there will be things that you agree with and things that you disagree with. Things that you're willing to take into you and things that you would like to keep away. But if you correct the mistake and you see in that moment that there's a backdrop, there's an ever-present sense of self that isn't, in fact, that thing, that starts to shift. Starts to shift that need to want to push things away or take things in. Because it's beyond it. There's not similarities and differences. It's just beyond it altogether. It doesn't mean you lose your personality or your sense of character. That'll keep operating. This is beyond it. It's not, again, something that you abandon. You don't abandon your personality. It's already there, right? It's present everywhere. The sense of self is already there. So nothing really changes. Now that's something that we have to, again, do the actual process in the moment and see if it's true for you. In the moment, if you feel like there's resistance to what's being said, can you do it? Is it true? Is there this sense of awareness that can objectify the response? The response is what they would consider the contamination, but they're saying the self is not affected by that. Just as the all-pervading space, being subtle, is not contaminated, so too the self, present everywhere in the body, is not contaminated. It's so subtle, it's so light, but nothing can harm it. It's so light, it's so soft and so subtle, is what makes it almost sometimes hard to believe it's there. This next verse, I think, works well. The last verse. This is verse 6 of chapter 15. Neither sun nor moon nor fire illuminates the self. Self is the supreme abode, reaching which they do not return. Neither sun nor moon nor fire illuminates the self. Self is the supreme abode, reaching which they do not return. So the awareness of a sense of self is self-illuminating. It's ever present. It doesn't go away. Even the sun's light will end. The moonlight, we watch it end. It's just reflecting the sun's light. A fire has a beginning and end, very clear, very easy to see. The temporariness, the impermanence of the light that illumines by the sun, by the moon, by fire. The light of the self is self-illuminating. It's always present. It has no attribute, which is one of the key ingredients. That's how light is actually it's a way for us to understand it, but it's not a way for us to have the knowledge. Because it's not like light. It's not like the light of the sun. The light of the sun is dependent upon whatever it is, that illuminating factor of the self. The self is that fundamental backdrop that we spoke about in the previous verse. So if you wanted to be able to see with your eyes, you would use moonlight, fire, sunlight. Without those things, you could not see. It'd be dark. If you wanted to live a life, you want to experience life, you need the self to illumine life. Right? You could live in the dark, meaning in terms of like fire and sunlight type of light. But that self is what illumines your life, not the sun, not the moon, not fire. The self is the thing that illumines this waking life that you're all listening to this experience in. The self is what illumines your dream. And you don't remember, I don't personally remember my deep sleep. I know that I'm not dreaming the entire time I'm sleeping, but I do know that I was there. If I wasn't there at all, upon waking up, I would have forgotten everything. I wouldn't have remembered there was a yesterday. So something had to maintain, something had to be present, some sort of fabric, some fundamental fabric that held me together. So that upon waking up the next day, I was still there. This is the self. There's no recognition of it. It just is. There's no reflection to it. The moon reflects the sun's light. The self has no reflector. The self has no reflection. There's nothing antagonist to it. There's nothing to bounce off of it. The sun has all the space that it lights up. As its antagonist, there's a relationship, but the self does not have that. So we even say, life is the self. It appears to be in pieces. It appears to be on top of the self. But as we settle more into this idea of the self, as we feel more content being this self that does not have attributes, self-illumining, we start to see that the life is the actual self. All of it, not just my body, not just my thoughts, not just my emotions, but all of it is the self. Even the things that our personality thinks are bad for the world or bad for us, that's all the self. This creates a deep sense of peace for me. It may be hard if you're having a political talk or you're trying to have discourse with someone on a certain value, but that's personal, that's subjective. This understanding is not for that place, maybe not for that person at all. But for some people, it's like everything else is just spinning your tires. It's not working. There's nothing that, when we look out into the world for answers, nothing ever really fully completes us. You've been seeking maybe a new philosophy, a new place to live, a better job, a better government. I'll feel better. I'll feel complete if people were nicer, if the environment was not being harmed. This would make me peaceful. This would make me complete or content. And until you believe and know inside yourself that that's never going to work, this work will not really take hold. If you still believe that one of those things, or any of those things, any number of those things, may help make you complete, this work can never fully take root. Because it's the entire encapsulation. It's the womb of all of it, the nest of all of it. And I'm not saying it because I'm like a nice advocate for it, as like it's proven to myself. Because there's been times when I've tried to make it small. I've tried to just make it a philosophy that I was into, a philosophy that I could stick behind, that I could define myself as. And it was completely missing the spirit of it. It was completely missing the mark. It was just another thing outside of myself. It wasn't my truth yet. And so when you listen, you have to say, maybe this isn't actually outside of me that I'm hearing. It's not Richard's voice. It's not the verse of the Gita. But I'm only really hearing the part of it that I already know. Because everyone who's going to listen to this is going to hear it differently. They're going to get a different meaning from my words. You're only going to be able to glean what's true for you from it. This is the correction my mind slowly made. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't hear anything but my own song, my own tune. And the more and more we start to settle into that realization, I'm only hearing my own tune being played. I'm making my own battle, making my own allies. I'm the hero, making my own enemies. The more I start to realize that this is not a fight worth fighting, all I got is a white flag, just waiting to raise it and let go, all those other characteristics start to collapse back into what? What is it going to all collapse into? All that narrative that you give yourself to explain your circumstances. If you collapsed all of that down, what's left? What's there still? What's that fundamental fabric being so subtle and all pervading? What would that be like for you? The Gita would say, that is what we're talking about. We don't need to force upon you the characteristics of this self. You already have it wired in. It's just about recognizing it. It is self-illumined. And when we correct that appropriation, we correct that, oh my gosh, it's nothing out there. It's not even the words from the Gita. It's what the Gita is pointing at, and it's pointing its finger right at you. When you collapse down that whole story, that whole narrative, what is left? This is the last part of this verse. The self is the supreme abode, reaching which they do not return. They is the seers, the most sincere seekers, the most earnest, the ones that no matter what will not stop looking. Because I said, remember earlier, happiness is not the goal. Truth is the goal. You may find yourself very happy. You may find yourself very peaceful. But it's not the goal. And you can't really control that. If you start, I've had students, I teach them a little bit, they learn a little bit of this understanding, and then things start going pretty good for them. They get a better job, get a boyfriend, get a girlfriend, and okay, I've had enough now. my heroes, I've got like some, it's like in the hero's story, like they get a new weapon, a new sword from the cave, and it's like, oh, I'm going to use this sword to go make, now I can slay those demons, and I get the princess or whatever in the story. And so now they've got a better situation. They'd rather just keep being their hero, keep their story going. They're not truth seekers. That's okay. Everyone's got their time and everyone's got their place. But this work can take a person. It's taken me to my conclusion. I don't know if it's your conclusion. It's my conclusion. And you test it. Because they call it the supreme abode. And by supreme abode, it's when you wrap up all that reaching out, whether you want to battle things or you want to take things and make them a part of you, things you agree with. You wrapped it all back up. What was left beyond that story? That's the supreme abode. And once you've gleaned it, you can't go away. It never left. We just made a mistake in how we identified it. We identified it as the body, but it's all within the body. It's not the body. It's within the body. All of it. We made a mistake. We actually called it the body. And we continue to do this over and over until a mistake is no longer made. And once the mistake's no longer made, we say, oh, we're resting in that place. You can't leave. That's why they don't return. It's not a choice. You don't get a choice to leave. You never got a choice to leave in the first place. It's always been there. Neither sun, nor moon, nor fire illuminates the self. None of those things that the hero is seeking are going to light this up for you. The self is the supreme abode, the home that you've never left, the home that you have no need to. You can't leave because there's nothing outside of it. There's nothing that its light does not shine upon. There's nowhere you can get to where you can't be seen by it. reaching which they do not return. Upon recognition that you cannot escape the light of your own awareness, the light of your own being, stepping into that knowledge, there's nowhere to go to.